The clock on the wall of the Meridian restaurant read 12:47 when Amara's entire life stopped. Not slowed, not stuttered. Stopped. She had been holding her daughter's hands, both of them, Zora on the left, fingers sticky from the lollipop she had sweet-talked out of Mrs. Priya before they left. Nadia on the right, quiet and warm and already looking at the ceiling the way she looked at everything worth drawing. The hostess had said something. Something about a table being ready. Something about following her. Something that Amara had nodded at without hearing. Because the moment they stepped through those glass doors into the soft amber light of the Meridian's main dining room, she had looked toward the window. And he was there. Dominic Ashford. Sitting at a table near the glass like he had always sat at tables near glass. Like the world was something that happened below him, and he was content to watch it. One hand around a coffee cup, the other holding his phone. His dark hair touched with silver at the temples now, silver that had not been there 7 years ago. His jaw sharper. His shoulders carrying the particular stillness of a man who had learned somewhere along the way that stillness was power. Amara stopped walking. Zora bumped into her from behind. "Mommy, why did you stop?" She could not answer. "Ma'am?" The hostess turned, polite confusion on her face. "Is everything all right?" It was not all right. Nothing was all right. Every instinct in Amara's body was screaming the same single word, and the word was run. Run the way she had run 7 years ago. Run the way she had been running ever since. But her legs had turned to stone, and her daughters were holding her hands, and it was already too late because Dominic Ashford looked up from his phone. Their eyes met. 7 years. 7 years of distance and silence and rebuilding and pretending collapsed into nothing in the space of one breath. His expression moved through shock, then disbelief, then something she had not expected, something that looked almost like relief, like a man who had been underwater for years and had finally broken the surface. Amara. Her name in his voice was a question and an accusation, and something she was not ready to name. It hit her the way cold water hits skin. She felt it everywhere. Nadia looked up at her. "Mommy, you're shaking." She was. She hadn't noticed. The hostess was still waiting. The twins were looking between their mother and the man by the window, with the wide-open attention of children who have learned that when adults go very still, something important is happening. And then Zora, because Zora had never in 6 years of life understood the concept of silence as protection, looked at Dominic Ashford with her bold gap-toothed smile and said the thing that ended whatever chance Amara had left of controlling this moment. "We're 6. We just had our birthday last week. We had a rainbow cake, and Mommy made it herself because she's the best baker in the entire universe." The silence that followed was absolute. Dominic looked at the twins. Really looked at them, at Zora with her wild dark curls and her mother's defiant chin, at Nadia with her careful amber eyes and her stillness, her particular quality of stillness that Amara had spent 6 years looking at and understanding and aching over because it was not hers. It had never come from her. It came from him. His hand found the edge of the table, his knuckles went white. When he spoke, his voice cracked on the last word like something breaking that had been under pressure for a very long time. "They're mine." Not a question. Never a question. "Amara, tell me they're mine." And standing there in the entrance of the Meridian restaurant with nowhere left to run, and her daughters holding her hands and 7 years of secrets pressing against her chest like a stone, Amara Fontaine closed her eyes. "Yes, broken, certain, irreversible. Yes, Dominic, they're yours. If you have ever made a decision at a fair that you believed was the only decision available to you, I need you to stay with me through this story. Because what happens next is not what you are expecting. And the reason it happened at all will change how you think about silence, about trust, and about the 10 seconds that can alter the entire course of a life. Before we go any further, if this story already has you feeling something, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. You are going to want to be here for every part of what happens next. This is Untold Desires with Mr. Lewis, and this is the story of Amara and Dominic. Now let me take you back. Back to the Wednesday morning that started like any other Wednesday, and ended by destroying everything Amara Fontaine had spent 7 years building. She had not set her alarm. Wednesdays were sacred. One day in 7, when she did not have to wake before the sun to start dough or temper chocolate or tile a 6-tier fondant cake for someone's daughter's quinceañera. Wednesdays were for sleeping until the light came through the curtains sideways, for scrambled eggs at 9 o'clock and cartoons and the particular luxury of a morning that belonged to nobody but her and her girls. Her phone rang at 7:20. She groaned and reached for it with her eyes still closed, squinting at the screen. It was Celestine, her boss, the owner of Lumet Patisserie, where Amara had worked as head pastry chef for the past 4 years. "Celestine, it is my day off." "I know." Celestine's voice was a ruin, thick and miserable and barely recognizable. "I know, and I would not be calling if I had any other choice." "Food poisoning. It is catastrophic. I cannot leave the bathroom. I would describe it further, but I love you too much." Amara sat up. "Do you need me to bring you something?" "I need you to save my business." A wet cough. "There is a tasting consultation today at 2 o'clock, the Meridian Hotel. They want us to redesign their entire dessert program, Amara. Every menu, every season. This is the kind of contract that changes everything for a small patisserie like ours. I cannot miss it, but I literally cannot stand up without something terrible happening." The name of the hotel landed on Amara's chest like a hand pressing down. The Meridian. She knew the Meridian. Everyone in this city knew the Meridian. 22 floors of polished marble and hush privilege, where the city's most powerful people ate their lunches and made their decisions and moved money around in ways that rearranged other people's lives. The kind of place she had quietly, deliberately avoided for 7 years, because the Meridian was not just a hotel. It was Dominic Ashford's world. Or it had been. She had not kept up with his acquisitions. She had made a practice of not keeping up with anything that had his name attached to it. "Celestine," she said carefully, "I am not sure I am the right person for this particular meeting. You created every single recipe on our menu. You won the regional competition 2 years running. You are the only person I trust with this." A pause filled with the sounds of genuine suffering. "I am begging you, Amara, as your boss and as your friend, please." She stared at the water stain on her ceiling that her landlord had been promising to fix since February. She already knew she was going to say yes. She had known it the moment she saw Celestine's name on the screen. Because Celestine had given her a job when she had been a single mother with a 7-month gap in her resume in desperation, she had tried very hard to disguise as confidence. Celestine had promoted her, mentored her, become something close to a friend. She owed this woman more than she could easily calculate. "Fine." She pushed back the covers. "I'll go, but I don't have a sitter. My neighbor is visiting family, and everyone else I trust is working today." "Bring the girls," said as if it were obvious. "They're well behaved. Give them something to color. The consultation is 2 hours at the most." Those would turn out to be the most famous last words of Amara Fontaine's life. She ended the call and sat on the edge of her bed for a moment, very still, listening to the city outside and the sound of her daughter's muffled voices through the wall. There was a tightening in her chest that she recognized. It was not quite anxiety, not quite dread. It was the particular physical sensation of something approaching that you cannot see clearly yet but can feel moving through the air toward you. She pushed it aside. She was good at pushing things aside. She showered. She dressed in a structured cream blazer and her best heels, professional without being desperate, the costume of a woman who had everything organized. She did her makeup with the focus she usually reserved for intricate sugar work, covering the dark circles and adding color to her cheeks until the woman in the mirror looked composed, capable, put together. She realized with a small shock, like the woman she used to be. Back when she had been Amara Solis, 24 years old and rising in the culinary world, winning small competitions and catching the attention of the right people, and believing, with the full unguarded faith of someone who had not yet been badly hurt, that things were going to work out. Back when she had been in love with Dominic Ashford, she turned away from the mirror with the force of someone closing a door. She was not that woman anymore. She was Amara Fontaine now. Her grandmother's maiden name, chosen the night she fled because it was the only name she could think of that felt like a place she had once been safe. She was a pastry chef, and a mother and a woman who had rebuilt her life from nothing and was proud of what she had made from the rubble. She did not think about Dominic Ashford. She went to wake her daughters. They were already tangled together in Zora's bottom bunk, even though Nadia had a perfectly good bed directly above. They did this every night, migrating toward each other in the dark the way they had since the beginning, two halves of the same thing pulling back together by instinct. "Good morning, my loves." She sat on the edge of the mattress and touched their hair, one at a time. Zora's wild curls, Nadia's smoother, straighter waves. "Change of plans today. Mommy has a work meeting, and you two are coming with me. We're going somewhere very fancy." Zora's eyes flew open immediately. Zora's eyes always flew open. She had arrived in the world at 6:30 in the morning with her eyes open, and had approached every subsequent morning the same way. How fancy. Crystal glasses, cloth napkins, men in bow ties. Nadia, slower awake, was sitting up now. "Will there be dessert?" "There might be cake." "Then I forgive the change of plans," Zora announced. Amara laughed despite everything. She dressed them carefully, matching navy dresses, their hair brushed and ribboned, white shoes she would spend the entire afternoon praying they didn't ruin. For herself, she completed the outfit with a touch of perfume, the expensive one she saved for occasions that mattered, the one that had been a gift from Celestine last birthday. They drove downtown through Wednesday morning traffic, the city looking clean and bright in the November light. The twins chattered in the back seat about Captain Bubbles, the class fish who had died in October and been replaced by an identical fish also named Captain Bubbles, as if continuity were simply a matter of maintaining consistent labeling. Amara drove and listened and tried not to think about the Meridian. She found parking in a garage 2 blocks from the hotel that charged more per hour than she made in an afternoon and tried not to calculate the total. She helped the girls out of the car and crouched down to their level in the concrete half-dark. "Okay, when we go inside, I need best behavior from both of you. No running, no touching things that don't belong to us, no announcing things at full volume." "You say that last one specifically because of me," Zora said without apparent offense. "I say it because it's important." "Mommy." Nadia's hand found hers. "Quiet and steady. Your hands are shaking." She looked down. They were. She had not noticed. "Just nervous about the meeting," she said. Nadia's amber eyes held hers with a particular certainty of a child who knows more than she is saying. "You'll be wonderful. You always are." Amara squeezed her daughter's hand and did not say what she was thinking. She stood up, took both their hands, and walked toward the Meridian. The hotel lobby was everything she remembered from the one time she had been inside it 7 years ago, on Dominic's arm at a charity function that had made her feel like an imposter in a world that was not hers. Marble floors that reflected the light. Enormous arrangements of white flowers. Staff who moved with the silent efficiency of people who had been trained to be invisible. The restaurant occupied the ground floor, behind glass doors etched with the hotel's crest. Amara gave her name at the desk. The hostess checked her list, confirmed that the Lume patisserie consultation was expected, explained that their contact had not yet arrived, but that she was welcome to wait at a table. She gathered menus and turned to lead them through. And that was when Amara looked up. Dominic Ashford was sitting at a table near the window. The world narrowed. She was aware of the sound of her own pulse. She was aware of the twins, hands in hers, one sticky and one warm. She was aware of the hostess continuing to walk, and of the need to follow, and of the catastrophic impossibility of what she was seeing. He had not seen her yet. He was looking at his phone, scrolling with the particular absent focus of a man whose mind was elsewhere. He wore charcoal today, a suit that had been made specifically for his body, and his dark hair caught the light from the window, and she could see, even from this distance, the silver at his temples that had not been there the last time she had stood in the same room as him. She stopped. Zora bumped into her. "Mommy, why did you stop?" The hostess turned back, polite confusion arranged on her face. And Dominic looked up. Everything that happened in the next 4 seconds happened simultaneously and in slow motion. His eyes found hers. His expression passed through shock and disbelief and confusion and landed somewhere unexpected, somewhere that looked almost like the end of a very long wait. His phone lowered. His coffee sat forgotten. "Amara!" The sound of his voice saying her name after 7 years of silence was something she had not prepared for. She had imagined it in her weaker moments. Late at night, when the girls were asleep and the apartment was too quiet, she had imagined it and told herself she was past it and pushed the imagining away. She had not been past it. She was not past anything. "Ma'am?" The hostess was looking at her with careful concern. "I just need a moment." But the twins were already moving. The crystal glasses had caught the light. The white tablecloth was pristine, and the centerpiece roses were the deep red of something from a fairy tale, and Zora was already pulling forward with the force of a 6-year-old who has made a decision. "Mommy, look, can we sit here? Can we please?" Nadia was moving too, quieter but equally decided. Amara let herself be pulled forward. Because what else was there? What else could she do, standing in the entrance of this restaurant, with her daughters in her hands and 7 years of secrets pressing against her ribs? She sat down. She positioned the girls on the far side of the table from Dominic. She picked up her water glass and set it down. He had not looked away from her once. His phone was face down on the table. His entire body was still with the particular stillness of a man using every resource he has to remain composed. The twins were enchanted by the napkins, which had been folded into the shapes of swans. They immediately began unfolding and refolding them with the focused energy of children engaged in important research. "Amara." His voice was quiet, controlled. The voice he used when the thing he was actually feeling was too large for the room. "Small world?" She made herself look at him. "Dominic." 7 years. He leaned forward, barely. "You vanished completely. Change your name. And then you simply walk into my restaurant." Her stomach dropped. "Your restaurant." "I acquired the Meridian 2 years ago," the faintest edge beneath the calm. "I imagine you didn't know that." "I'm here for a work consultation." "My boss was supposed to." "I don't care why you're here." He said it without cruelty, which was somehow worse than cruelty. Then his eyes moved to the twins. He watched them for a moment, watching the way they held their swan napkins and argued over who had done a better job of refolding, watching Zora's gestures, large and theatrical, watching Nadia's quiet concentration. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "How old are they?" The question landed in the space between them like something irretrievable. Amara could have lied. She was aware, in some distant rational part of herself, that she could have said 5, could have said 7, could have manufactured some version of the truth that would have bought her time to think. But Nadia chose that exact moment to look up from her napkin swan. Her amber eyes met Dominic's across the table. His eyes, unmistakably, irreversibly, his eyes looking back at him from the face of a 6-year-old child. "We're 6, Zora announced, with the cheerful authority of someone providing helpful information. "We just had our birthday last week. We had a rainbow cake and Mommy made it herself because she's the best baker in the entire universe." The sound Dominic made was not quite a breath and not quite a word. His hand found the table edge. His knuckles went white. "They're mine." His voice cracked on the last word like something that had been under pressure for too long. He looked at Amara. His eyes were very bright. "Tell me they're mine." Amara felt the tears rise before she had any hope of stopping them. After all of this, after all the years and the running and the rebuilding and the quiet, desperate work of convincing herself she had made the only possible choice, it was ending here, in this restaurant, with these white tablecloths and these swan napkins and her daughters, hands still sticky from lollipops. "Yes." The word came out broken in the middle and a hole at the edges. "Yes, Dominic, they're yours." The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Zora looked up. Her instincts, inherited entirely from her mother, had registered that something significant had just happened even if she did not have the framework for it yet. "Mommy?" "Why are you crying? Is the fancy restaurant making you sad?" "No, baby." Amara pressed the back of her hand to her cheek. "Mommy is just having a lot of feelings right now." "About what?" Nadia was not looking at her mother. She was looking at Dominic, with those quiet, amber eyes that had always seen more than they revealed. "Why is he looking at us like that?" Dominic stood. The sound of his chair scraping against the marble floor drew glances from 3 nearby tables. He did not seem to register this. "Outside," he said to Amara. Low and controlled and barely. "Now." "Not here. Not in front of my daughters." The words came out like something tearing. "You don't get to tell me what to do in front of my daughters, not after 7 years of not knowing they exist." The twins had gone completely still. Zora's napkin swan sat forgotten on the table. Zora herself was looking at this man with an expression that was 3 parts confusion and 1 part the particular suspicion that children reserve for adults who are not telling the full truth. "Mommy," she said. Her voice had dropped to something smaller than its usual register. "Who is this man? Why is he so sad?" And Nadia, because Nadia had always been the one who named the thing everyone else was circling around, said it. "He looks like me." The 3 words fell into the silence of the Meridian restaurant like stones into still water, and the ripples went out in every direction, touching everything. Dominic looked at Nadia, the anger in his face, the barely controlled fury of a man who has just discovered that 7 years were taken from him, softened into something so raw and unguarded that Amara had to look away. He crouched down slowly to Nadia's level. When he spoke, his voice was a different voice entirely. Gentled. Careful. The voice of a man approaching something precious and breakable. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Nadia." Small and steady, the way she always was. "And that's my sister Zora." "Those are beautiful names." He looked up at Amara. Something moved through his eyes. "You named them after light." She had not expected him to know. Nadia meant hope. Zora meant dawn. On their second date, walking through the city at 4 in the morning after a dinner that stretched into something neither of them had planned, she had told him about her grandmother's belief that names carried the future inside them, that you named a child not for who they were, but for who you hoped they would become. He had listened with the focused attention he gave to things he considered important. He had remembered. After 7 years through everything, he had remembered. "I need you to explain this to me," he said quietly, only for her, all of it, every single part of it. "I will." She meant it. She had always known, in the deepest part of herself, that this conversation would eventually happen, that she could not run forever. But not here, not like this, not in front of them. He looked at the girls again, at Zora, who had resumed folding her napkin with determined concentration while keeping one eye sharply on the adults, at Nadia, who was still watching Dominic with the open, unhurried attention of someone who has already decided she is not afraid. Something in him made a decision. She could see it happen. The fury did not disappear, but it stepped back to make room for something else, something that recognized that whatever needed to be said between them needed to happen without 2 6-year-olds as witnesses. "After lunch," he said, clipped, controlled. "But Amara." His eyes came back to hers and held them with an intensity that she felt in her sternum. "You are not disappearing again." She nodded once. They rearranged the tables, pushing them together at the hostess's carefully neutral suggestion. The twins were delighted by this development. A bigger table, more glasses, better angle on the roses. Zora immediately claimed the seat with the clearest view of the restaurant entrance, so she could, as she explained, see everyone who came in. Nadia opened the menu and began studying it with the seriousness she brought to everything. Dominic sat across from Amara. Under the table, she could see his leg moving with the barely contained energy of a man who wanted to be doing something other than sitting still. Above the table, his face was composed, careful, the mask he had learned from a childhood spent in rooms where showing feeling was considered weakness. The server appeared. "Give us a few minutes," Dominic said, with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without explanation. The server vanished. The twins were examining the menu with varying degrees of comprehension. Zora was asking about every item that had a name she didn't recognize. Nadia had found the dessert section and was reading it with the focused reverence of someone studying scripture. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Dominic asked. He directed the question at both of them, but his voice had the quality of a man who is filling a container he did not know was empty, filling it as fast as he can, aware of the years that have passed and the years that cannot be recovered. "A chef," Zora said immediately. "A famous one." I'll have a restaurant, and there will be a line around the block every single night, and everyone will say my name when they talk about food. Is that right? It is definitely right. And you? He looked at Nadia. A pause. Nadia set down her menu with care. I want to design buildings, she said. The tall ones. I draw them in my sketchbook. Mommy takes us downtown sometimes, and I copy the shapes of the ones I like. Dominic went still in a way that was different from his earlier stillness. This was not the stillness of control. This was the stillness of recognition. Umara knew why. Before the weight of Ashford Global had settled on his shoulders permanently, before his father had made clear that the heir to an empire did not have the luxury of dreams that did not serve the empire. Before all of that, Dominic had wanted to be an architect. She had seen his old sketchbooks once, pulled from a drawer in his apartment almost by accident, full of buildings that existed only in his mind. He had looked at her, finding them with an expression that was somewhere between vulnerability and shame, as if she had discovered something he had been keeping from himself. I used to draw buildings, he said. His voice was careful. When I was young. Nadia looked at him with her full attention. What happened? A beat. Long enough to mean something. I got busy with other things. That's sad, she said simply, not unkindly, simply. The way children say the truest things, without the cushioning that adults wrap around difficult observations. Dominic looked at Amara over Nadia's head. She looked away, but not before he saw that she had known. Not before he registered that she had remembered the sketchbooks after 7 years, the same way he had remembered the names, and that the memory of what he had given up had lived in her long enough to breathe itself into the child they had made without knowing they were making her. You could show her your old drawings, Amara heard herself say. You still have them. He looked at her with something sharp and wondering. You remember that? I remember everything. The admission came out before she could weigh it. It landed between them like something neither of them was ready for. The server returned and they ordered. The twins chose things they could not pronounce based entirely on the descriptions, which Zora read aloud with theatrical emphasis. Dominic ordered for himself, with the automatic ease of someone who had eaten at this restaurant many times, which of course he had. He owned it. The lunch that followed was one of the strangest hours of Amara's life. On the surface, it was pleasant, warm even. The twins were at their most charming, which was considerably charming. They told Dominic about their school, about their teacher, Miss Okafor, who was strict but fair, and kept a collection of interesting hats on a rack by the window. They told him about Captain Bubbles, the first one, and the replacement, and their views on whether the class had been properly honest with itself about the nature of the transition. Zora held that they should have named the second fish something different to honor the first fish's individuality. Nadia held that continuity of naming was a form of respect. They had been arguing this point for 3 weeks. Dominic listened with the focused hunger of someone trying to absorb 6 years in 90 minutes. Beneath the surface of this pleasant lunch, 2 adults were conducting a different conversation, entirely using only tension and glances and the occasional sentence with an edge sharp enough to cut. I'm sure you'll be a wonderful chef someday, Dominic said to Zora, and then looked at Amara with something that was not quite a smile. Your mother could tell you all about making decisions unilaterally. She's had a lot of practice. Amara kept her expression still. What does unilaterally mean? Zora asked. It means by yourself, Nadia said, without looking up from her food, without asking anyone else. Oh, Zora considered this. Is that bad? Sometimes, Dominic said, quietly, still looking at Amara. Grown-ups are complicated, Amara said. Her voice was level. We're going to talk about it later. You always say that, Zora observed, and then later always turns out to be more complicated than you planned. Dominic made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite. Not yet. The desserts arrived. Chocolate mousse with gold leaf, presented with the Meridian's particular flair for making sweetness feel like an event. The twins went quiet in the way that children go quiet, when something has exceeded their expectations. They divided the mousse between them with the surgical precision they brought to all matters of fair distribution, using the back of a spoon to achieve an exact line down the center. So you know, Zora said, still focused on the mousse, if you are our mommy's old friend, you should come visit more. We don't have very many friends who are grown-ups. We have Mrs. Priya, Nadia said. Mrs. Priya is 80 years old, Nadia. She is 63 and she objects to being called old. My point stands. Zora looked up at Dominic. You could come for dinner sometime. Mommy makes really good food. Not as good as what she makes at work, but good. Dominic looked at Amara across the table. Something moved through his expression that he did not try to hide. I would like that very much, he said. If your mommy agrees. Amara met his eyes. In them she could see everything that was waiting on the other side of this lunch, the conversation that was coming, the 7 years that needed to be accounted for, the anger that was still there, controlled but present, the way a fire is present even when someone has put a screen in front of it. We'll see, she said. That means yes, Zora told Dominic confidentially. This time the sound he made was definitely a laugh, small and broken and not quite right yet, but something. The consultation contact arrived 40 minutes late, flustered and apologetic, and was handled by Dominic's staff with the smooth efficiency of a machine that had been built specifically for the purpose of managing unexpected situations. Amara's meeting was rescheduled for the following week. She was handed a card and given an apology and offered a complimentary tea, which she accepted because her hands needed something to hold. When it was over, when the lunch had been cleared and the twins had been convinced to put their leftover sugar packets back, Dominic stood and looked at Amara with the quiet certainty of a man who has made a decision. I'll drive you home. We have a car. Leave it. I'll have someone bring it to you. A pause. I need to know where my daughters sleep, Amara. The possessive weight of those words. My daughters. She had known they were coming and she had still not been ready for them. She nodded. His car was a dark SUV that the twins immediately identified as the fanciest thing they had ever been inside. Zora discovered the screens in the headrests within approximately 4 seconds, and the rest of the journey passed in a state of technological wonder. Nadia found the window controls and spent the drive adjusting them by fractions, studying the mechanism with the quiet focus of someone filing away information for later use. Dominic drove with both hands on the wheel. The city moved past the windows. In the front seat, the silence between him and Amara was the kind that has texture, that presses against the skin. She has my mother's hands, he said very quietly, not to Amara specifically, to the air. Amara looked at Nadia in the rearview mirror. She had not noticed it before, or rather she had noticed it without knowing what she was noticing. The particular way Nadia held things, the careful, deliberate grip that was different from Zora's grabbing enthusiasm. She thought of the photograph she had seen once in Dominic's family home, his mother at 20, with a book in her hands, and the way those hands were held. She said nothing. Her apartment building was modest and clean, in a neighborhood that was safe and ordinary and nothing like the Meridian. She watched Dominic take it in as they pulled up, watched him catalog it without judgment, just observation, the way he had always looked at things, gathering information, building a picture. They rode the elevator in silence. The twins narrated the elevator's journey floor by floor for reasons known only to themselves. Her apartment was small and immaculate and full of the evidence of a life built from nothing but determination and love. Drawings taped to the refrigerator in thick overlapping layers. A shelf of library books with handwritten return date slips. 2 mismatched chairs at the kitchen table that she had reupholstered herself on a Saturday afternoon when the girls were 3. Photographs covering every horizontal surface and most of the vertical ones, the documented history of 3 people who had been enough for each other even when enough was very hard. Dominic moved through the space slowly. He stopped at a photograph of the twins at 18 months, round and unsteady, holding onto a coffee table with both hands and grinning at the camera with the triumph of people who have just figured out gravity. His jaw worked. He stopped at a photograph of the twins on their first day of school, backpacks that were almost as large as they were, Zora's expression of total confidence, Nadia's expression of total attention. He stopped at a photograph taken in the hospital 2 days after they were born. Amara, exhausted and undone, and more radiant than she had ever looked in any other photograph, holding 2 very small bundles against her chest, with the particular fierceness of someone who has decided they will not let go. Alone, she had been alone in that photograph. The absence of him was not visible in the image because you cannot photograph an absence. But she felt it now, standing behind him watching him look at it, as clearly as if it had always been there. "You went through that alone." His voice was rough. "I had a friend with me. She held my hand." "Not me." A pause. "Not their father." She had no defense to offer. It was true. She had made it true. Her neighbor, Mrs. Priya, appeared at the door with the timing of a woman who had been watching through the peephole, which she had, because Mrs. Priya was 63 and shrewd, and had strong feelings about Amar's well-being. She agreed to watch the twins without asking a single question about the well-dressed man in the apartment, simply nodded with the knowing expression of someone who has lived long enough to recognize a reckoning when they see one, and took the girls away with promises of cardamom cookies. The door closed. The apartment was very quiet. Amara and Dominic stood in her small living room with 7 years of silence between them and the length of 2 worn cushions and everything that had never been said. "Start from the beginning," he said. He sat on one end of the couch. She sat on the other. The space between them felt like a country. "Tell me everything." She took a breath, the kind of breath that is also a preparation, the kind you take before you say something that has been waiting 7 years to be said. "I found out I was pregnant the week after your father's gala," she began. Dominic's expression changed at the mention of his father, tightened, became something controlled and complicated and old. "I was terrified," she continued, "and overwhelmed. And I knew I needed to tell you in person, not over the phone, not in a message. I wanted to see your face. I wanted us to be in the same room when I told you." She paused. "I came to your office that Friday evening. I had food from that Moroccan place you always ordered from when you were working late. I had a plan. I was going to tell you, and then we were going to figure it out together. That was what I believed. That was what I was counting on." Dominic was very still. "I remember that Friday. You never came. I called you for hours." "I did come." Her voice was quiet. "You just didn't see me." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "The door to your office was open. Not all the way. Just enough." She looked at her hands. "I heard your father." The stillness that came over Dominic then was different from all his previous stillnesses. This one was the stillness of someone who already knows, somewhere in themselves, what they are about to hear. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in 7 years, she let herself go back to that hallway. She was 24 years old. She was pregnant by 11 days, and she was the only person in the world who knew it. She was carrying takeout containers and a heart full of terrified hope, and she was walking down the corridor toward the office of the man she loved. The door was open 2 inches. She heard Gerald Ashford's voice first, low, certain, the voice of a man who had never in his life questioned whether his certainty was warranted. "When are you going to end this thing with the soulless girl?" She stopped walking. "Father," Dominic's voice, tighter than usual, "this is not a conversation I'm willing to have. You don't have a choice about whether to have it. She is a distraction, Dominic, a pleasant one, I'll grant you. But the board is asking questions about your focus and your judgment, and I will not have this family's reputation. My personal life is not the board's business. Your personal life is entirely the board's business when you are the face of Ashford Global. Do you understand what is at stake here? The contracts we are negotiating, the partnerships, the careful work of decades, all of it depends on the world seeing you as a man of substance and discipline, not a man who has lost his head over some girl who makes cake for a living." A silence. Amara's hand moved to her stomach, to the life that was 11 days old and the size of nothing and the most enormous thing she had ever carried. "She is not some girl," Dominic said. His voice had a quality she recognized, the quality of someone choosing words with precision because the alternative is saying something that cannot be taken back. "She is not suitable. You know it and I know it. The question is whether you're going to do something about it before it becomes a problem." Gerald's voice hardened. "I assume there are no children." Amara stopped breathing. A silence. Dominic said nothing. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 7. 10. "Good," Gerald said. "Final. Absolute. Keep it that way." The food containers were heavy in her arms. The corridor was very cold. The door was open 2 inches, and inside that room was the man she had come to tell, the man she had believed would look at her and say, "Yes, of course. Yes, we'll figure it out together." And he had said nothing. He had heard his father call their potential child a problem, a complication, something to be prevented. He had heard it, and he had chosen silence. She turned around. She walked back down the corridor. She walked out of the building. She did not stop walking for 7 years. Present day, her apartment, her couch, the November light coming through the window at a low angle. Dominic was on his feet. She had not seen him stand. He was at the window now, his back to her, both hands pressed against the glass. His shoulders were rigid with the effort of containment. "That is why you left." His voice was stripped of everything. "Because of my silence. You heard your father call our child a problem, and you said nothing." "I said nothing because I was trying not to put my fist through the wall." He turned. His eyes were very bright. "I was so angry at him I could not trust myself to speak. If I had opened my mouth in that moment, the things I would have said could not have been taken back, and I was trying to... How was I supposed to know that?" Her voice broke open. "How was I supposed to know what your silence meant? I was pregnant and alone, and I had just heard your father make it perfectly clear that I was not welcome in your world and that our child would never be welcome. And you said nothing. You said nothing, Dominic. If you had waited..." He stopped. His voice cracked down the middle. She looked at him. "If you had waited 10 more seconds," he said, "you would have heard me tell my father that I was going to propose to you, that I wanted a future with you, that I would walk away from the company and the board and the entire Ashford legacy before I would walk away from you." The apartment tilted. Amara put her hand on the arm of the couch. "I told him everything," Dominic said. His voice was barely a voice anymore. "And then I went to find you. To tell you. To ask you properly the way I had been planning for 2 months." He looked at her, and you were gone. The silence that followed was not like the earlier silences. It was the silence of something breaking that had already been broken for a very long time, and the break was the beginning of something rather than the end. "I thought I was protecting them," Amara whispered. "I know. I thought your silence meant." "I know what you thought." He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her. His voice was low and exhausted, and 7 years old. "And I need you to know that while you were running from something that wasn't there, I spent 7 years looking for you." She looked up at him. 2 years after you left," he said, "I found a mention of you in a regional baking competition, a photograph, a small article in a local paper. I drove 3 hours to that bakery. By the time I got there, you had moved. My landlord raised the rent." "I know. I spoke to him." He sat down on the other end of the couch, not the far end, closer than before. "I spoke to a lot of people. I had investigators, databases, contacts. I never stopped." He looked at her. "There was more that kept you away than the hallway. I could see it in how completely you disappeared. Tell me the rest." She breathed. 3 months after I left," she said, "I received a letter from your father's legal team." The expression that moved across Dominic's face then was one she had never seen on him before. It was something close to grief. Something close to the recognition of a harm you cannot undo. "They told me that if I ever contacted you again, if I ever tried to claim any connection to the Ashford name, they would destroy me professionally. They would ensure I never worked in my field again. And if I had children," her voice held steady with effort, "they would pursue custody on grounds of instability. I was 24 years old and alone, and I believed every word they wrote." The silence that followed was the longest of the afternoon. Dominic stood again. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her for a long time. "My father died 4 years ago," he said finally. "Heart attack. He was gone before the ambulance arrived." "I know. I saw it in the news." "After he died, I spent a year discovering what he had done, the people he had threatened, the lives he had interfered with to protect the Ashford name." He turned. "Yours was not the only one. Not even close. I paid settlements to people he had wronged. I tried to undo as much of the damage as I could." He looked at her steadily. "I never found you, even then. You had gone too far, changed too much. My investigators said you had simply ceased to exist." "Fontaine was my grandmother's name," she said softly. "It felt like a place I had once been safe." A long pause. "I know," he said. "I figured that out eventually. By then," he shook his head, "by then I had begun to think that perhaps you didn't want to be found, that you had built a life you preferred, that looking for you was its own form of not letting go. I never stopped. She caught herself. He looked at her, waiting. I never built another life, she said. I built a life for them, for Zora and Nadia. But not for myself. Not really. She looked at her hands. I told myself I was past it. I was very convincing. The light in the apartment had shifted while they were talking. The afternoon was moving toward evening, the low November sun turning everything amber and long-shadowed. Through the wall came the faint sound of Mrs. Priya's television and, beneath it, the voices of the twins engaged in some negotiation of unknown subject. Dominic sat down again, closer this time. The country between them had become something smaller, not a country anymore, something crossable. What happens now? He said. It was not quite a question. I don't know. Honest. Tired. 7 years tired. I know what I owe you. I know that sorry isn't enough. That sorry doesn't give you back the years, the first steps, and the first words, and... She stopped. No, he said. It doesn't. A pause. But it is a beginning. He looked at her. I want to be their father. Legally, publicly, completely. I want to know them. I want to be present for everything from here forward. I won't fight that. She meant it absolutely. I never wanted to keep them from you forever. I only ever wanted them to be safe. I know. A pause. And us? The question landed between them with the weight of everything it contained. She held his gaze. I don't know, she said again. There's so much that's happened, so much that needs to be understood. I'm not asking for everything tonight, he said, quiet and certain. I'm asking for one day at a time. He reached across the space between them, his hand open, an offering. She looked at it. She looked at him. She thought about the hallway and the 10 seconds and the 7 years that followed. She thought about the letter and the fear and the choices she had made from a place of terror rather than truth. She thought about her daughters, voices through the wall, and the way Nadia had said he looks like me, with the matter-of-fact certainty of a child who had simply named something that was already true. She placed her hand in his. One day at a time, she said. Outside, the city continued. The November light continued its slow journey toward dark. And inside a small apartment on the 14th floor, 2 people who had lost 7 years to a silence that lasted 4 seconds held the very first moment of whatever was going to come next. There is a particular kind of mourning that only exists in the very early days of something new, before trust has been tested, before the ordinary friction of 2 lives trying to occupy the same space has had time to accumulate. A mourning that is all possibility and no history yet, soft at the edges, careful and tentative, like the first light, after a very long dark. Dominic Ashford showed up at 7:15 on a Thursday. Amara opened the door, still in her bathrobe with her hair not done, and a spatula in her hand, because Zora had requested French toast, and French toast required attention, and she had not been expecting anyone at 7:15 on a Thursday. He was standing in the hallway in a dark sweater and dark trousers, not a suit, which was the first surprise. He was holding a paper bag from the bakery on the corner and 2 coffees, and he had the expression of a man who has rehearsed several versions of what he planned to say and has now abandoned all of them. I didn't know if you'd... He stopped, started again. I wanted to see them before school. She stepped back from the door. He came in. From the kitchen, Zora's voice carried clearly. Mommy, the bread is going to burn if you don't come back. I'm coming. Dominic followed her into the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway. Both twins were at the kitchen table. Zora in her school uniform already. Nadia still in her pajamas because Nadia dressed at the absolute last possible moment and not a second before. They looked up. Zora's eyes went to the paper bag. What's in there? Croissants, Dominic said, and something with chocolate that the woman at the bakery said was exceptional. You should have called first, Amara said from the stove. I know. A pause. I didn't want to give myself time to talk myself out of coming. There was a silence in the kitchen that lasted 2 full seconds. Then Zora said, You can sit there, and pointed at the chair across from her, with the authority of someone who has decided the situation is manageable. But you have to try the French toast, because Mommy makes the best French toast, and you should know that about us. Dominic sat down. That was how it began. Not with a formal conversation or a legal arrangement, or any of the structured adult machinery that Amara had imagined would be required. It began with French toast at 7:15 on a Thursday and a paper bag of croissants and Zora telling Dominic at length about the ongoing situation with Captain Bubbles, while Nadia watched him from across the table with her quiet amber eyes and said very little and took in everything. He came back Friday. He came back Saturday. By the following Tuesday, it had become simply the shape of the morning. Dominic at the table, while the girls ate, and Amara stood at the counter, drinking her first coffee of the day, and the apartment filled with the noise and warmth of a household that was learning new rhythms. He made mistakes. Of course he made mistakes. He forgot about the tree nut allergy on day 3 and had to be talked back from a state of alarm by Amara, who explained that the allergy was mild and that Zora had always been fine as long as she avoided cashews and pistachios specifically. He called Nadia's sketchbook her drawing pad, which Nadia corrected with patient precision twice before he got it right. He did not know about the purple cup. The purple cup was a matter of some significance in the Fontaine household. There were 2 cups on the second shelf of the cabinet, one purple and one blue. They were identical in every measurable respect except color. Nadia's cup was the purple one. This was not negotiable, and never had been. Dominic gave her the blue one on his 4th morning, and the expression on Nadia's face was not distress exactly, but it was the particular expression of someone experiencing a small but meaningful wrongness in the universe. He noticed immediately. "What did I do?" "The purple one is hers," Zora said helpfully, already reaching past him to swap them. "I'm sorry," he told Nadia. "It's okay," she said. "You didn't know." "I'll know from now on." She looked at him for a moment with those eyes that held more than she said. "Yes," she said. "I think you will." It was on a Sunday, 3 weeks after the restaurant, that they told the girls the truth. Amara had thought about how to do it for days, had read articles, had thought through framings, had prepared for every possible response. She and Dominic had talked about it on 3 separate evenings after the girls were asleep, sitting at her kitchen table with the quiet, particular intimacy of 2 people navigating something enormous and delicate together. "Let them lead," she had said, "as much as possible. Don't make it into an announcement. Make it into a conversation." He had nodded. He deferred to her in these matters because she had raised these children for 6 years, and he had not, and he knew it. Whatever else was complicated between them, this clarity was something she appreciated about him. Sunday morning, the girls still in their pajamas, sunlight coming through the kitchen windows in wide, flat rectangles. Amara had made pancakes because pancakes felt like the right architecture for a difficult conversation, warm and familiar, and something to do with your hands. "Girls," she said, "we want to talk to you about something." Zora looked up from her pancake with immediate interest. Nadia put down her pencil, because Nadia always had a pencil. "You know how Dominic has been coming over every morning," Amara began. "Yes," Zora said. "And you know how we told you he was an old friend?" "Yes." "That's true, but there's more to it than that." She looked at Dominic. He looked back at her steadily. "Dominic is—" She took a breath. "He's your father." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Zora stared at her mother, then at Dominic, then at her mother again. The machinery behind her eyes was visibly working. Nadia did not stare. Nadia looked at Dominic with the same unhurried attention she had given him since the restaurant, and then she said, in her quiet, certain voice, "I know." Amara blinked. "You know? I figured it out," Nadia said. "He has my eyes and my hands, and he got very still when I said I wanted to design buildings, which means it matters to him in a way that connects to us somehow. And he knows which cup is mine now." She looked at Dominic directly. "I was waiting for you to say it." Dominic made a sound that was something between a laugh and something much less composed. He pressed his hand over his mouth for a moment. Then Zora, who had been processing this at her own particular speed, said, "Does this mean you're going to live here?" "We're going to figure that out," Amara said. "Does this mean we can get a dog?" "Zora, I'm just asking." "Because we've wanted a dog for a long time, and it seems like this is a good moment to bring it up." Dominic looked at Amara over the girls, heads with an expression that was full of something she had not seen from him in a very long time. Something that looked like the beginning of joy. "We'll discuss the dog," he said. Nadia climbed down from her chair. She crossed to where Dominic was sitting and stood in front of him for a moment, regarding him with those careful eyes. Then she put her arms around him. Not the full-force collision that Zora would deliver a half-second later, but something more deliberate. A choosing. "I knew you were ours," she said against his shoulder. From the first day. Dominic held her with the particular fierce care of a man holding something he did not know he had lost until the moment it was returned to him. His eyes were closed. His jaw was working. Zora arrived a moment later like a small hurricane, throwing herself at him from the side with an enthusiasm that nearly knocked the chair over. "You should have told us sooner," she announced from somewhere against his arm. "We would have been fine with it." Dominic laughed. The real laugh this time, full and unguarded, and nothing held back. And Amara stood at the stove, with her hand on the handle of the pan, and felt something in her chest open that had been closed for a very long time. It was not a perfect morning. It was not a perfect anything. But it was real, and real, she was learning again, was worth more than perfect had ever been. The weeks that followed were warm and difficult, and full of ordinary beauty. Dominic was present in ways that rearranged everything. He showed up for school pickup on the days Amara had late shifts at the patisserie. He attended Zora's soccer match and stood on the sideline in his good coat looking entirely out of place and cheering with a volume that surprised everyone, including Zora, who scored twice and pointed at him both times with an expression of ownership and pride. He took Nadia to the observation deck of the tallest building downtown on a Saturday morning, just the two of them. She brought her sketchbook. He brought his old sketchbook, the one she had mentioned, the one with the buildings he had imagined into existence before the world told him to put it away. They sat on a bench with the city below them and drew together for 2 hours without saying very much. When they came home, Nadia's sketchbook had 3 new pages and a new quality in her drawings, something more confident in the line weight, something that had learned from sitting beside someone who already knew. Dominic did not say much about it when he came back. He set the old sketchbook on Amara's kitchen counter and said only, "She's extraordinary," and she could hear in the word everything it contained. "I know," she said. "She's going to build things that change the way people move through the world." "I know." He looked at her. "You knew this was in her. You saw it early." "Yes." "And you thought about me when you saw it?" It was not a question. She answered it anyway, every day. The evenings became their time. After the girls were asleep, after the apartment had settled into its nighttime quiet, Dominic would stay for an hour or two. They sat at the kitchen table and talked. Talked in the way they had not been able to talk in 7 years. Carefully at first, and then with increasing honesty, reconstructing each other like people who have been given a damaged map and are relearning the territory together. She told him about the early years, how she had managed, the job she had worked before the patisserie, the 2 she had lost, the period when the twins were 18 months old, and she had been so tired that she had made a spreadsheet of which meals could be made for under $4, and had kept it pinned to her refrigerator for a year. He listened without flinching, without the impulse to minimize or fix, and she appreciated this more than she had words for. He told her about the year after his father died, the weight of what he had found, the settlements, the people, the architecture of damage that Gerald Ashford had built with such careful, invisible work over decades. He told her about deciding to restructure the company, about the board members who had pushed back and the ones who had surprised him by supporting the changes, about the year he had spent asking himself what kind of man he wanted to be, when the man who had defined manhood for him turned out to have been wrong about almost everything. "I think about my sketchbook sometimes," he said one evening. "What would have happened if I had fought harder for that, if I had chosen differently at 22? "You would have been an architect," she said. "Maybe. Or maybe I would have failed and given it up anyway, and spent my 30s wondering if it would have worked." He looked at the table. "I'm not sure the life we don't live is ever as clean as it looks from a distance." She thought about this. "I think that's true." "But Nadia," he looked up. "Nadia gets to find out. She doesn't have anyone telling her that the thing she loves is impractical. She just gets to—" He stopped. "She just gets to become it," Amara said softly. "Yes." They looked at each other across the kitchen table. The November light had long since been replaced by the lamplight of evening. The apartment was quiet and warm and full of the invisible presence of two sleeping children who had their father's eyes and their mother's stubbornness, and, between them, more future than either of their parents had known how to hope for. "I never stopped loving you," Dominic said. He said it the way he had always said difficult things, directly and without preamble, as if the only way to say a true thing was to simply say it. "I want you to know that. Whatever we are figuring out, whatever this becomes, I never stopped." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said finally. "I never stopped either." A pause. "That doesn't mean I know how to do this yet." "I'm not asking you to know." He reached across the table. His hand, open, the same offering it had been on the first evening. "I'm asking you to try." She placed her hand in his. It was not a declaration. It was not a resolution. It was a direction, chosen carefully, one evening at a time. It was enough. The morning the tabloid story broke, Amara was standing in her kitchen at 6:45, making school lunches and listening to the sound of the shower running, and Zora singing something incomprehensible and enthusiastic from behind the bathroom door. Her phone began to vibrate with a frequency that suggested something had happened. She picked it up. The headline was across 4 different news sites within the time it took her to read it once. Billionaire's secret family, Ashford's CEO, spotted repeatedly with mystery woman and twin daughters bearing striking resemblance. There were photographs, a sequence of them, taken across several weeks without either of them knowing, the work of someone with a long lens and patience. Dominic at the soccer match, his face unguarded and bright, cheering for Zora. Dominic and Nadia at the observation deck, sitting together with their sketchbooks. Dominic and Amara walking the girls to school, the 4 of them together on an ordinary Tuesday morning, looking entirely like what they were. Her phone rang. Dominic's name on the screen. "I just saw it," she said. "I'm already on my way." His voice was controlled in the way that meant he was furious. "Don't open the door for anyone. Don't respond to any messages from numbers you don't recognize. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She looked out the window. 3 news vans were already parked on the street below. "Mommy!" Nadia appeared in the kitchen doorway, fully dressed, sketchbook under her arm. She looked at the vans on the street with the calm appraisal of someone cataloging a new kind of data. "Why are there cameras outside our building?" "Something happened," Amara said. She kept her voice level the way she had learned to keep it level over years of being the only adult in the room. "Dominic is coming. We're going to figure it out together." Nadia considered this. "Is it because of us? Because people found out about us?" "Yes." A pause. "Are we in trouble?" Amara crossed the kitchen and crouched down to her daughter's level. She took Nadia's face in both hands. "No," she said. "Absolutely not. You are not in any kind of trouble. This is grown-up noise, and we are going to handle it." Nadia studied her for a moment. Then she nodded. "Okay." She went to the table and opened her sketchbook. "I'm going to draw while we wait." Zora emerged from the bathroom mid-song, registered the tension in her mother's posture, looked out the window at the vans, and said with the instincts of a child who had always been extraordinarily attuned to consequence, "That doesn't look good." "It's being handled," Amara said. "By who?" "By Dominic." Zora appeared to find this satisfactory. "Okay," she said. "What's for breakfast?" Dominic arrived in 19 minutes with 2 people from his security team and a composure that Amara recognized as costing him considerable effort. He came through the door and looked at her first, then at the girls, then at the windows. "I should have anticipated this," he said. "I should have had protection in place weeks ago. You couldn't have known. I know how this works. I know how my name draws attention. I know how the press operates around this family, and I let myself forget because I was—" He stopped. "I was focused on being here, and I wasn't thinking about the cost of it, and I am sorry." The girls were watching him. Zora said, carefully, "Are you the kind of billionaire that people take pictures of?" "Apparently," he said. "That seems like it would be annoying." "It is." "What are we going to do about the cameras?" He looked at Amara, a question in the look. She nodded slightly. "We're going to tell the truth," he said, "that I have 2 daughters, that I am very proud of them, that their privacy matters, and that anyone who violates it will hear from my lawyers." He looked at Zora directly. And then the story will be old news in 2 weeks, and people will move on to something else. Zora absorbed this. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you go to school through the car park entrance, and Dominic's people make sure nobody bothers you, Amara said. Like bodyguards? Zora's expression shifted to something that was trying very hard not to be excited about this and failing. We get bodyguards? It's temporary, Amara said firmly. Still, Zora looked at Nadia with significant eyes. Nadia, who had been drawing through most of this conversation, looked up long enough to give Zora a look that said, "Don't make this into a thing," and then returned to her sketchbook. The media storm lasted 11 days. Dominic's team released a statement that was precise and measured and disclosed exactly what needed to be disclosed and nothing more. Yes, Dominic Ashford had recently and joyfully discovered that he was the father of twin daughters. Yes, he intended to be fully present in their lives. The details of the family's private history would not be shared publicly, and any media outlet that approached the children or their school would face immediate legal action. The tabloids speculated, the gossip sites theorized, social media had opinions that ranged from deeply romantic to deeply suspicious, because social media always did. Amara stayed as close to home as she could manage. Celestine, with the generosity that had always defined her, offered a flexible schedule. Mrs. Priya, who had watched the news coverage with growing indignation, declared that anyone who came near the 14th floor would have to get through her first, which she seemed to mean literally. On the 6th day, when the worst of it had not yet passed, Amara and Dominic had the argument. She had known it was coming. She had felt it building the way you feel a weather change, before the sky shows it. It came on a Tuesday evening, after the girls were asleep, the two of them at the kitchen table, with the particular exhausted tension of people who have been managing a crisis together and have not had space to say the things that need to be said. "You're using resources to manage this," she said. It came out more sharply than she intended. Dominic looked up. "I'm using resources to protect our daughters." "You're calling your lawyers and your PR team and your security people, and you're organizing it all from the top down, and it's very efficient and it looks very familiar." A pause. He was very still. "Say what you mean, Amara. Your father managed problems the same way." The silence that followed was the kind that has a physical presence. Dominic set down his coffee cup. Slowly, with careful control. "I am not my father." "I know that. I know you're not him." She pressed her hands against the table. "But I spent 7 years being afraid of the machinery. The lawyers and the power and the way people with money can arrange the world around themselves without asking anyone's permission. And right now, that machinery is running, and I am inside it, and I didn't choose to be. You are inside it because your photograph is in 15 publications and your daughters are being followed to school." His voice was controlled but not comfortable. "What would you have me do? Not use what I have. Watch from a distance while people invade your life because of my name." "I would have you ask me," her voice broke slightly, "before you mobilize, before you send people and make calls. I would have you ask me first." A long silence. Dominic looked at his hands on the table. Something in the rigidity of his shoulders changed. Became less like defense and more like listening. "You're right," he said finally. She had not expected it to come that quickly. "I am not my father," he said again, quieter this time. "But I have his instincts. When something threatens what I care about, I reach for what I know how to use. And I know how to use money and influence and legal teams." He looked at her. "I never ask permission before I reach. I should have. I'm sorry." She let out a long breath. "I know you were protecting them," she said. "I know that's what it comes from. It will always come from that. But you are their mother, and this is your life, and you have the right to be asked." He reached across the table, not taking her hand this time, just placing his near hers. An offering that did not assume. "I'm asking now. How do you want to handle the rest of this?" She looked at him for a moment. This man who was not his father and was learning, every day with real effort, how to be something different. "Together," she said, "we handle it together." He turned his hand palm up. She placed hers in it. The storm passed. It always does. By the 3rd week, the coverage had thinned to occasional mentions. By the fourth week, something else had captured the collective attention, and the Ashford story was relegated to archive. The girls went back to school through the front entrance. The news vans disappeared from the street. Mrs. Priya stood down from her self-appointed post by the elevator with what appeared to be mild disappointment. Life resumed its shape, a new shape now, four-sided where it had once been three. Dominic reduced his hours at Ashford Global in ways that his board found alarming, and he found entirely straightforward. He promoted 3 people who had been waiting years for the authority he had been quietly hoarding. He restructured his schedule so that mornings and evenings were protected. His assistant learned that family time was not a category of appointment that could be shifted without a very good reason. Grace, his business partner, noticed immediately. "You're different," she told him over lunch, 3 months after the restaurant. "You're lighter, more present. You were always sharp, but now you're also somewhere." "I have somewhere to be," he said. "Tell me about them." So he did. He told Grace about Zora and her restaurant ambitions and her soccer goals and the way she approached every conversation like a negotiation she intended to win. He told her about Nadia and the sketchbook and the buildings and the purple cup and the way she had said "I know" when they told her the truth, without surprise or drama, simply confirming something she had already understood. Grace listened with the warm attention she had always brought to things that mattered. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "And Amra?" she said. He looked at his coffee cup. "I never stopped," he said. "I know," Grace said. "I always knew, even when you were angry. Even when you told yourself you were past it." She reached across the table. "Don't wait too long, Marcus. Some things don't stay available forever." He looked at her. "My name is Dominic." She smiled. "I know what your name is. I also know what I mean." He thought about what she said for the rest of the day. He thought about it in the car on the way to Amara's building for dinner. He thought about it while Zora told him about a disagreement at school that she had resolved by presenting her position in what she described as a very organized argument. He thought about it while Nadia showed him the newest pages of her sketchbook, pages that had begun to show not just buildings but the spaces between buildings, the negative space, the way structures created silences in the air around them. He thought about it long after the girls were asleep, sitting at the kitchen table across from Amara in the lamplight of a Thursday evening. "I want to show you something," he said. He took out his phone and opened an album. He turned the screen toward her. The album was titled From the Beginning, and it contained photographs, older photographs, digital scans of the kind that spoke of careful preservation. Amara at a restaurant she recognized, laughing at something he must have said, her face caught at the exact moment of delight. Amara at his family's summer house, standing at the water's edge with her shoes in her hand, and the particular expression of someone who is allowing herself to be happy. Amara at the botanical gardens, at a table that had been set for 2, the roses in a jar on the white cloth, her eyes bright with the specific brightness of someone who does not yet know what is coming. She looked through the photographs. Her throat was tight. "The botanical gardens," she said. "Our second date. You kept these." "I kept everything." He took the phone back. He looked at the screen for a moment. "That was the evening you told me about names. About your grandmother believing that names carry the future inside them." She was very still. "I had a plan," he said. "I had been planning it for 2 months. I had the ring." He looked at her. "I was going to take you back there. The botanical gardens. The same table. I had arranged the same flowers. I had a speech that I had written and rewritten." He paused. "I never got to use it." The lamplight was very quiet around them. "I am not going to recreate something that belongs to a different version of this story," he said. "What we have now is its own thing, and it deserves its own moment." He reached into his jacket pocket. A small box. Amara's breath stopped. "I love you," he said, simply and directly, the way he said true things. "I loved you 7 years ago, and I love who you have become, and I love the life you built for our daughters when you were alone and afraid, and I love that you did not let fear make you small, even when you let it make you run." He looked at her steadily. "I want to spend the rest of my life being the kind of man who deserves to sit at your kitchen table. I want to be their father in every room of every day. I want to build something with you that is more honest and more real than anything either of us had before." He opened the box. The ring was simple and perfect. A single stone, clear and sure, set low in a plain band. Not a performance of wealth, a choice. Marry me, Amara, not because of the girls, though they are the greatest consequence of everything I have ever done. Because of you. Because I have spent 7 years knowing that no version of my life that didn't include you was going to be the real one. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. She thought about the hallway and the 10 seconds and the 7 years that had followed. She thought about the letter and the running and the apartment she had built into a home with nothing but determination and love. She thought about French toast at 7:15 on a Thursday morning, and a man learning which cup was the purple one, and a child saying, "I knew you were ours from the first day." She thought about one day at a time. "Yes," she said, clear and certain and entirely unbroken. "Yes, Dominic, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had always known it would be there. He reached across the table, and she met him halfway, the way she had been learning to do, and he kissed her in the lamplight of her kitchen, and it was not their first kiss, and it was not their last, and it was entirely, completely the right one. She pulled back after a moment and laughed because she was also crying, and the combination felt very accurate to the situation. "You planned this," she said, "for approximately 3 weeks. You had the ring in your jacket pocket this whole evening. I had the ring in my jacket pocket for 2 weeks. I kept losing my nerve. Dominic Ashford," she said, "lost his nerve. Repeatedly," he said, "you are very intimidating when you're happy. You are somehow even more intimidating than when you're angry." She laughed again. She put her hand against his face. He turned into it. "Go wake them up," she said. He looked at her. "It's 9:30, she said. "I know, I don't care. Go wake them up. They should know tonight." He stood up from the table. He walked down the hall. She heard the quiet sound of a door opening, and then his voice, low and warm, and then the particular rustling and questioning sounds of 2 children being gently pulled from sleep. A moment later, 2 sets of footsteps came down the hall. Zora first, her dark curls wild from the pillow, blinking in the kitchen light. Nadia behind her sketchbook somehow already in her hand, trailing the blanket she had brought with her, as if she had known she might need it. "Why are we awake?" Zora said. It was not quite a complaint. It was the question of someone who suspects the answer is going to be interesting. "Because something happened," Amara said, "and we wanted you to know tonight." Zora looked at her mother's face, at the ring. Her eyes went wide. "Nadia," she said. "I see it," Nadia said. They stood in the kitchen doorway, 2 6-year-old girls in their pajamas in the 9:30 dark, looking at their parents. Zora's expression was moving through several stages simultaneously, landing finally on something that was pure, uncomplicated joy. "Does this mean," Zora said, "that we are officially a family now, like on paper?" "On paper," Dominic said, "and in every other way." Zora looked at Nadia again with the eyes she used when something had been confirmed that she had predicted. Nadia looked back at her with the eyes she used when she was choosing not to say that she had predicted it first and longer. Then Zora crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and threw her arms around Dominic's waist. "Finally," she said into his shirt. Nadia came more slowly. She stopped in front of Amara first. She took her mother's hand and looked at the ring for a moment, studying it the way she studied buildings, looking for the structure of it, the intention behind the form. "It's simple," she said. "Yes." "That's how you know it's real." She looked up at her mother. "Complicated things are usually trying to hide something. Simple things are just what they are." Amara looked at her daughter. This extraordinary particular child, who had arrived in the world with her father's eyes and her own ancient wisdom, and had spent 6 years being more than enough to live for. "When did you get so smart?" she said softly. Nadia considered this seriously. "I've always been like this," she said. "You just don't always notice because Zora is louder." From across the kitchen, Zora said, "That's fair, without any offense whatsoever." Amara laughed. Dominic laughed. Nadia allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, and then went to stand beside Zora, and the 2 of them leaned against Dominic's sides, 1 on each, fitting against him with the comfortable certainty of people who have decided where they belong. Amara looked at the 4 of them. She thought about the meridian, about the hostess and the amber light and the moment she had frozen in the doorway with nowhere left to run. She thought about being 24 and standing in a hallway with takeout containers and a heart full of terrified hope, and she thought about how different things might have been if she had waited 10 more seconds. And she thought about how this was the lesson, not that she had been wrong to be afraid. She had been afraid for real reasons, and the fear had been understandable and human and the product of circumstances that had been designed to make her run. The lesson was not about her failure. The lesson was about the 10 seconds, about the gap between what we see and what is real, about how fear fills that gap with the worst possible interpretation and calls it wisdom, about how silence can look like agreement and stillness can look like absence, and how the things we overhear through doors left open 2 inches can become the foundations of choices that reshape years. The lesson was, stay long enough to know. Ask before you assume. Trust before you conclude. Give the people you love the chance to finish their sentence before you decide you already know what it means. The lesson was also this: it is never too late. Amara had run for 7 years and still found her way back. Not because the world had been kind to her, because she had been brave enough, finally, to stop running and stand still long enough for the truth to catch up. The wedding was small and entirely themselves. They held it in the spring, in the backyard of the house Dominic had found, and Amara had made a home, the house with the good kitchen light, and the backyard big enough for 2 children, and the dog that Zora had been negotiating for since the night of the proposal. The guest list was 40 people. Celestine was there, Grace was there, elegant and warm, the only family Dominic had chosen rather than inherited. Mrs. Priya sat in the front row in her best sari, and spent most of the ceremony dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief she had clearly brought, specifically for this purpose. The girls were in soft gold dresses. They had chosen the color themselves after considerable debate. Zora had wanted red, which she considered more dramatic. Nadia had wanted blue, which she considered more architectural. Gold had been proposed as a negotiated settlement and accepted by both parties as representing dawn, which was, after all, what Zora's name meant. Amara walked out into the garden on a Saturday morning in April in a dress that was simple and right and exactly what she had known she wanted when she saw it. The garden was full of the kind of sunlight that feels like a beginning, the kind that makes everything look like it was designed to be seen in exactly that light at exactly that moment. Dominic was standing at the end of the path looking at her with an expression she was going to spend the rest of her life being grateful to know. They wrote their own vows. Dominic had written his in the margins of a notebook during a flight and rewritten them 6 times. He had shown her none of the drafts. He had shown her nothing, and she had respected this and been quietly terrified, and also, somewhere beneath the terror, entirely confident that whatever he had written would be true. "I promise to show up," he said. His voice was steady and entirely certain. "Every morning, every school pickup, every soccer match and every sketchbook and every ordinary Tuesday. I spent 7 years not being here, and I understand now that being here is not just a thing I want to do. It is the thing. The actual thing. Everything else I have built and everything else I will build is in service of this." He looked at her. "I promise to ask before I act. I promise to hear you out before I conclude. I promise to remember that your silence is not agreement, and my certainty is not always wisdom." A pause. "I promise to be someone worth waiting for, even when I don't deserve it." Amara had prepared her vows carefully. She had wanted them to say something true, without saying everything. To honor what they had been through without being consumed by it. "I promise to trust you with my fear," she said. "The real fear, not the managed version. I spent 7 years being afraid alone, and it made me capable and strong, and it also cost us everything. I don't want to be alone in my fear anymore." She stopped for a moment. Let the garden be quiet around her. "I promise to wait the 10 seconds. Always, from now on, no matter what I think I'm hearing, and no matter what the fear tells me it means. I promise to wait and ask and stay." She looked at him. "I loved you before I understood you. I understand you now, and I love you more than I knew I was capable of. I want to spend my life finding out how much further that goes." There were no dry eyes in the garden. Mrs. Priya's handkerchief was thoroughly deployed. Grace appeared to be studying the sky at a particular angle that happened to keep her face mostly hidden. The twins had been given the task of holding the rings and had taken this responsibility with the seriousness it deserved. When the moment came, Zora presented the rings with a formality that suggested she had been rehearsing. Nadia had added something to her version of the presentation. She had drawn a small picture on the inside of the ring box's lid. Two hands joined over a line that represented a table. Below it, in her careful small writing, 1 day at a time. Nobody cried harder at this than Dominic. After the ceremony, after the food and the speeches, and Grace's toast that was funny and true and had the garden laughing and then quiet in the right order, after Mrs. Priya had danced with Zora in a way that suggested she was considerably more agile than 63, after the evening had moved into night and the garden was strung with lights, and the girls were finally, reluctantly asleep in the house behind them, Amara and Dominic stood together at the edge of the garden looking up at a sky that was doing its best. "We made it," she said. "We did. Against considerable odds. Against remarkable odds." He put his arm around her and she leaned into it. I think the story we tell about this later should emphasize how dramatic it all was. It was dramatic. It was the restaurant, the secret twins, the media storm, the proposal over kitchen table at 9:30 at night, with the ring in your pocket for 2 weeks. That part stays between us. She laughed. The garden was quiet around them. Inside the house, 2 children were asleep in their rooms, in the beds they had chosen themselves, under the fairy lights they had picked out on a Saturday afternoon that Amara would remember for the rest of her life. In this moment, with the night air on her face and her husband beside her and the impossible rightness of it all, she thought about the morning she had looked in the mirror and seen the woman she used to be. She was not that woman anymore. She was not Amara Solis, 24 and unguarded and in love, without understanding what love would require. She was not Amara Fontaine, alone and capable, and building a life that was safe because it was small. She was something new, something that contained all of it, the fear and the running and the rebuilding and the finding, and was not diminished by any of it. She was exactly who she was supposed to become. The years that followed were not without their difficulty. Nothing real ever is. There were arguments, misunderstandings, the ordinary friction of 2 people learning to share a life after years of shaping themselves around absence. There were days when the old fear surfaced and she had to choose, consciously and with effort, to wait the 10 seconds instead of running. There were days when Dominic's instinct toward control came before his instinct toward asking, and they had to have the conversation again, not with the weight of the first time, but with the practiced ease of people who have learned to navigate the same terrain repeatedly and know where the difficult ground is. The girls grew. Zora grew into herself with the force of something that had never doubted its own direction. At 12, she organized a school fundraiser that raised more money than any previous effort in the school's history. At 14, she told her parents she intended to open her first restaurant before she was 30 and presented them with a 5-year plan she had written in a notebook that she had titled Operations. At 17, she won a regional cooking competition and dedicated the win to her grandmother Fontaine, whose story she had only ever heard secondhand, but whose name she carried like an inheritance. Nadia grew quietly and with tremendous depth. She did not announce her progress, she simply arrived at it. At 13, her portfolio was shown at a youth arts exhibition, and an architect who came to the opening spent 40 minutes looking at her drawings and asked to speak to her parents. At 15, she visited 3 architectural schools and came home from each one with notebooks full of questions and the particular focused excitement of someone who has recognized the shape of their future. At 18, she was accepted to the best program in the country on a scholarship that she had applied for without telling anyone, because Nadia had always done things in their own order. When she told them, at dinner on an ordinary Wednesday, Dominic went very quiet in the way that meant he was too full of something to speak. He left the table for a moment. When he came back, his eyes were clear, and he sat down and said simply, "I'm so proud of you, I don't have language for it." Nadia said, "I know, Dad," and went back to her food. Amara opened Sweet Second Chances on a Thursday morning in the spring, 4 years after the wedding. The name had come to her in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, The girls asleep and Dominic in the study with a contract he needed to review, the apartment quiet around her. She had been thinking about what she wanted the bakery to be, what she wanted it to mean beyond the revenue and the recipes and the professional milestone of it. She wanted it to be a place that tasted like beginning again. The sign above the door was hand-painted in her grandmother's favorite shade of blue. The menu was everything she had ever made with love. Her grandmother's chocolate cake and her own croissants, and the French toast recipe she had perfected across years of Thursday mornings, with 2 daughters who required it. The walls were covered in photographs, some of her own, some contributed by customers who came in and never quite left. On opening day, Celestine arrived at 7 in the morning before the doors were open and stood outside, looking at the sign with wet eyes. "You were supposed to stay at my patisserie forever," she said. "I will still come in for coffee," Amara said. "You better," she hugged her. "I am so proud of you, I could explode." Dominic was there all morning. Zora, 16 by then, worked the front of house with an authority that suggested she had been running restaurants her entire life and was only here as a courtesy. Nadia sat in the corner window seat with her sketchbook and drew the interior as it filled with people, capturing the particular quality of a space that had been loved into existence. By noon, the line ran out the door and down the street. By evening, Amara was standing in the empty bakery after the last customer had gone, flour on her apron and her feet aching and her heart more full than she had a word for. Dominic found her there. He came through the door and stood looking at her across the empty room, at the photographs and the blue walls and the sign in the window that said "Sweet Second Chances" and meant everything it said. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she said. He crossed the room and she met him halfway, the way she always did now, the halfway that had become as natural as breathing. "I want you to know something," he said. "Tell me. I think about that hallway sometimes, about the 4 seconds and the letter and the 7 years." He looked at her steadily, "And I am grateful for all of it." She looked at him. "Not for the pain," he said. "Not for the years we lost or the things that were taken from us, but for who it made us. For the people we had to become to get here." He looked around the bakery, at the walls and the photographs and the space she had built from a dream she had been carrying for years. "This does not exist without all of it. Those 2 extraordinary people we are raising do not exist without all of it. We do not exist as who we actually are without all of it." She thought about this. She thought about it the way Nadia thought about buildings, looking for the structure beneath the surface, the intention behind the form. "The 10 seconds, she said finally. "Yes. I think about them too." She leaned against him. "I think, what if I had waited? What if I had stayed in that hallway? What if none of it had happened the way it did? And then I think, but it did happen. And we are here. And the girls are going to change the world." She looked up at him. "And I chose you again, knowing everything this time. That's different from the first time. That's better." He kissed her forehead. "One day at a time," he said. "Every day," she said. Outside the bakery, the city continued its evening movement, unaware and uninterested in the small, large thing that had happened behind a blue sign on an ordinary street. Inside, 2 people held each other in the quiet that follows a very long journey and understood, in the way you can only understand a thing after you have lived it all the way through, that this was not the end of the story. This was simply the part where it became fully itself. And in a bedroom on the 14th floor of a building that Amara still kept because she was sentimental and because Nadia had drawn it once and framed the drawing and given it to her for her birthday, there was a graphic novel on the shelf beside the window. Nadia had made it herself, over 3 months, in secret. She had given it to her parents on their 2nd anniversary, sitting at a table at the Meridian, at the window where it had all begun. The last page of the book showed 4 figures standing in a garden at evening. The light was amber, and the garden was strung with lights, and in the background behind the 4 figures was a door that stood open. Below the image, in Nadia's careful handwriting, were 4 words. Every door was necessary. If you have stayed with this story all the way to the end, I want to say something to you directly. Something that is not about Amara or Dominic or their extraordinary daughters, but about you. You have a hallway in your life, everybody does. A moment where you stopped and turned around before the sentence was finished. A silence you interpreted as agreement when it was something else entirely. A door you walked away from because fear told you it was already closed. Maybe it was a relationship. Maybe it was a dream you set down because someone who mattered to you went quiet at the wrong moment. Maybe it was a version of yourself you stopped believing in because you overheard something, or assumed something, or ran from something that was actually reaching for you. The lesson this story carries is not that second chances always come. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes the meridian does not happen, and the years do not return, and the thing that was lost stays lost. That is the truth, and this channel does not trade in comfortable lies. The lesson is about the 10 seconds you can still choose, right now, today. Wait before you run. Ask before you assume. Stay in the hallway long enough to hear the whole sentence. And if you have already run, if the years have already passed, and the thing you lost is somewhere behind you in the distance, consider this: the meridian is always open. You never know what you might walk into when you step through the door. This is Untold Desires with Mr. Lewis. If this story moved you, if it made you think about a door you walked away from, or a silence you misread, or a version of your life that is still waiting for you to come back to it, I want you to do 3 things. Subscribe to this channel right now. Every story we tell here is built for people who believe that love and transformation and second chances are not just entertainment. They are a practice, a way of living. Leave a comment below. Tell me about your hallway. Tell me about the 10 seconds you wish you had waited. Or tell me about the ones you did wait and what you found on the other side. And share this story with someone who needs it. You know who they are. You thought of them somewhere in the middle of this video, and you kept watching, and they were still in the back of your mind when you reached the end. Send it to them. You never know what a story can do when it reaches the right person at the right moment. This is Mr. Lewis, reminding you that the next chapter of your story starts the moment you decide to stop running and see what is on the other side of the door. Stay hopeful, stay open, and remember, second chances are not about erasing what happened. They are about choosing, with full knowledge of the cost, to walk back through.